I'm Cassie. I have a strong American accent, as you can hear. So I'm from the US, but I've been in Australia now about 7.5 years. My background is in startups and scale-ups, and particularly scale-ups that are in kind of hyper-growth mode. Most of the scale-ups that I've been in have been around like a marketplace style concept and a lot of small business solutions. And generally what I do for those companies is I lead kind of a variety of the ops style teams. And for each model, that means something totally different, but it's generally the people who aren't the engineers and whatever needs to get done. So I started out at the very beginning of my career as a customer service rep in the early days of Groupon, right when it was getting started. So I was really lucky to find that role at a company that was like rocket ship mode, because it meant that I had the chance to grow with that company for a long time as it was growing at the same time. So it meant that like I was growing my career as the company was expanding in opportunity, actually. So we went from, when I was there, we went from having just, a couple cities that we were covering to 48 countries and an IPO and a whole bunch of stuff going on. So I grew with that company, did a variety of things, started new departments, moved over to Sydney to lead a few things in APAC, went over to technology, to the engineering world for a while to lead product for one of the business units, and just spent a lot of time at Groupon and learned a lot. And that was one of the kind of career defining parts of what I did. But then after that, I moved over to the Aussie startup scale-up scene as opposed to the global one with Groupon. And I turned into kind of a COO for Hey You app, which is an Aussie scale-up where you can pre-order your takeaway coffee and food. So I led the operations teams there. And then I went and did a similar thing for One Flare after that, which is an Aussie scale-up around professional services. It's a professional services marketplace. Now I've taken a little bit of a turn and moved into corporate innovation. And so what I do now is I lead the commercial experts who work on assessing opportunity spaces, and then we actually go ahead and build those businesses. I received a lot of great career advice, but actually the best career advice I received was actually more like life advice from my dad that just he repeated over and over my whole childhood and just got so ingrained. It's actually more of an attitude even than advice. So he would just always say, you can do anything that you put your mind to. And that is probably like the quote or like the phrase that defines how I try to approach life and work. And I found it really helpful in work because I think it speaks to that anything is possible, but also that you have to work for it. So you need to have perseverance. You need to be really hardworking. You need to be creative. You need to have the courage to take on new opportunities, but like it's all possible, but you have to go for it. You have to have that hard work and grit, and you have to really be dedicated. So I would actually say that was probably what I would describe as the best career advice. I actually think for me personally, what I wish I had known at the start is I wish I had had the self-awareness to figure out what my personal coping mechanisms were for like high stress and demanding environments. It actually took me a long time to even figure out that I needed those. Because I have a pretty high threshold for stress and high workloads, which is probably why I've survived in the startup and scale-up world for as long as I have. Most people burn out like 8 years before this. So I wish I had developed that self-awareness earlier. It took me a while to figure out that I needed it, and it took me a while to figure out what those coping mechanisms were for me personally. And I think everyone's answer for this is different, but I think the tip here is like try to figure that out sooner rather than later, and it'll just make everything easier. So I learned that in order to avoid like work dreams every single night, all night, I have to read. I have to engage my mind with something else beforehand. So reading is the way. Like TV doesn't work, chats with my partner doesn't work, nothing else works, but reading something interesting that's not about work. Or like on the weekends, I need a bit of a creative outlet. So I learned that I must spend a little bit of time, ideally each weekend, doing something like physically creative. So I've kind of developed a bit of a hobby around pottery or other things. And, bonus points if I can do it alone and with music on. So, it just took me a while to get the self-awareness to know how to like keep a little bit of balance, especially when you're in such a demanding environment where you don't have much time. You need to be able to like very quickly take a breath. And you might not be able to dedicate a lot of time to other things other than work. So you've got to figure out how to take a breath. So many, but I try to view them not really as mistakes or screw ups, but more as like learning opportunities. But I guess what I would perhaps say is that there was one particular career move that I made where I was actually still within Groupon and I was changing like my focus area so dramatically that I was actually kind of taking on a double whammy of knowing nothing. So I didn't know anything about the new business unit that I was moving to, and it was completely different from the other one that I've been working on. And I was also moving over to engineering to work directly with devs as a product owner, as a product manager. Again, something I had never done before because I had been within ops before. And I didn't fully appreciate the importance of understanding the business side so deeply before you start figuring out what tools to build and how to change them. So I tried to do everything all at once, and it did work out okay because frankly, a lot needed to happen all at once in that kind of environment. But I think if I had literally just held up my hand to my new boss and said, like, can you just give me a week? Just give me a week. All I'm going to do is spend time with this business unit, and I'm just going to immerse myself in their day-to-day minutia of what they do so that I can come back to you 1 week from now, a much better product manager. It would have been a lot easier on me. There have been plenty of other times in my career where I made a move and just learned on the fly completely, and that works a lot. And I'd really recommend people to do more of that than they do now. But that is one particular instance where I think I should have sequenced it a little differently. Particularly in the environments I work in, which is, startup, scale up, innovation stuff, adaptability and faith in your ability to learn are frankly the two most important things. And I feel like I've kind of developed those two things. And so, you use those skills every day when you're in those kind of environments, but if you apply them to your career, it's also really helpful, like to your career growth. So as applied to career growth, basically what it means is that I try with each new opportunity I seize, I try to make sure that that is the opportunity that is truly going to force me to learn something new that I have no idea how to do. So actually that's like my main criteria when I kind of take on new opportunities is, am I going to force myself out of my comfort zone and to learn something new? So, that example that I talked about where it was the biggest mistake I ever made, that was a perfect example. Like, what was I doing moving to a totally new business unit and to the engineering team in a new region, new part of the world, like all at once. But I took it because it was a great chance to learn, and learn I did, that's for sure. And so I just try to do that with each move. The one that I just made is a great example too. I moved over to corporate innovation, whereas before it would have been much more comfortable to continue in COO scale-up roles because I know how to do that very well. I've done it a couple times now. So I just try to keep that kind of mindset. And I think that's why I've had the opportunity to learn so much and grow so much in the time that I've had in my career.